wrongfully detained and one extra day if we can bring that person home. My administration has now brought home dozens of Americans who were wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad, many of whom had been held since before I took office. And today, we also remember the other Americans that are being held hostage and wrongfully detained in Russia or anywhere else in the world. Reuniting these Americans with their loved ones remains a priority for my administration, every person in my administration involved in this. We're going to continue to work to bring home every American who continues to endure such an injustice. We also want to prevent any more American families from suffering this pain of separation. And I strongly urge all Americans to take precautions, including reviewing the State Department's travel advisories before they travel overseas, which now includes warnings about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Make no mistake about it, this work is not easy. Negotiations are always difficult. There are never any guarantees, but it's my job as President of the United States to make the hard calls and protect American citizens everywhere in the world, anywhere in the world. And I'm proud that today we had made one more family whole again. So welcome home, Brittney. And now I'd like to invite Cherelle to say a few words, Joe. Of course, she's not excited at all about this. Cherelle, it's all yours, kiddo. Congratulations again.
Thank you. So over the last 9 months, you all have been so privy to one of the darkest moments of my life. And so today I'm just standing here overwhelmed with emotions, but the most important emotion that I have right now is just sincere gratitude for President Biden and his entire administration. He just mentioned this work is not easy, and it has not been. There's been so many hands involved. And so I'd like to take a moment to just specifically mention a few. Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Josh Geltzer from the National Security Council, Roger Carson and Fletcher Schoen from the Hostage Envoy's Office. A special thank you to Governor Richardson and Mickey, the Mercury Players, the WNB PA for your advocacy. And also, you guys may not know this, but my family has been tremendously supported by the Washington agency. BG's agent, Lindsay Colas, has just been amazing for me and my family throughout this process. So today my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole. And so BG's not here to say this, but I will gladly speak on her behalf and say that BG and I will remain committed to the work of getting every American home, including Paul, whose family is in our hearts today. As we celebrate BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones. So thank you everybody for your support. And today it's just a happy day for me and my family. So I'm gonna smile right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Mr. President, what is Russia got in return for this prisoner? What is Russia got in return for this prisoner?
Brittney be back in the U.S.
What is Russia got in return?
Happy day there for Brittney Griner's wife, Cherelle. Brittney Griner, of course, on her way home now, on a plane, on her way back from Russia to the United States. President Biden just announcing the release their trade for arms dealer Viktor Bout. City of Vegas at the White House, something the president is working on for months.
George, they've been working on this at the highest levels of these governments between here in the United States and Moscow with constant talks. And as you heard the president say, not just talks between these governments, the president has been in close contact over these last 9 months with Cherelle Griner. George, we have to pause and talk about that smile on Cherelle Griner's face. What a day for this family to see Brittney Griner, as she called her by her nickname, BG, on her way home. President Biden posting on Instagram and Twitter this photo saying just moments ago, you can see right there, they were on the phone with Brittney Griner. He says she is safe. She is on a plane. She is on her way home. We know that Griner was pardoned by Putin before she left Russia, that this swap between these two prisoners, for the prisoner exchange happened at the Abu Dhabi airport early this morning. And President Biden saying just now, this was a choice. This was not a choice about which American to bring home, because Paul Whelan is still in custody, and he is saying that Moscow views that as a very different case, that he will work to continue, the administration will continue to try to bring him home. You heard Cherelle Griner there say that this will be both her and Brittney's mission going forward, that they remain committed to getting these other Americans home. But George, the headline here, the smile on her face, Brittney Griner is on her way home. What a day this is, what a coup for this administration, but most importantly, Brittney Griner is on her way home as we speak.
Cecilia Vega, thanks. Let's go to Martha Raddatz. Martha, the president did devote so much of that statement to the case of Paul Whelan as well, and we've already heard from Whelan's family.
We have, George, an incredibly gracious yet heartbreaking statement. Let me read part of it. I am so glad, this is from David Whelan, Paul's twin brother. I am so glad that Brittney Griner is on her way home. As the family member of a Russian hostage, I can literally only imagine the joy she will have being reunited with her loved ones. The Biden administration made the right decision to bring Ms. Griner home and to make the deal that was possible rather than waiting for one that wasn't going to happen. Now, when Trevor Reed was released earlier this year, the family released a statement. Paul Whelan said, "Why was I left behind?" But that is not happening this time. David said in the statement, "It is so important to me to make clear that we do not begrudge Ms. Griner her freedom." But he said, at some level, our family has steeled ourselves for this likelihood, despite the possibility that there might be an exchange without Paul. Our family is still devastated. They, of course, George, are very worried about his health. He has been there 4 years and has many 12 years to go on that sentence. So there is a lot of worry in the Whelan family, but again, an incredibly gracious statement. And President Biden, of course, mentioned that he will stay on this case, and Cherelle as well.
And Martha, we also heard President Biden say that the Russians insist on treating Paul Whelan's case differently. At minimum, he's another bargaining chip.
And another bargaining chip, I guess they weren't about to release two people who are being detained for just Viktor Bout, although that is a major exchange. Excuse me. So the Russians will try something else, you can imagine. But this is a very different case, and the Whelans say that as well. Paul Whelan was accused of spying, and they claim, again, that he had a USB drive on him that contained the names of intelligence officers, and he has been detained since 2018 and charged with spying. Obviously, a very serious charge in Russia, George.
Martha Raddatz, thanks. Pierre Thomas, Viktor Bout, notorious arms dealer, his heyday in the 90s.
Known as the Merchant of Death. And this was a person that U.S. law enforcement had wanted to serve every bit of his sentence. But clearly, the freedom of Brittney Griner became the priority. Law enforcement knew it. They went along with this, helped facilitate it, George. But clearly, this was a man who was involved in flying weapons all across the world, including to Africa, where thousands of people were killed, supposedly with his weapons. The DEA eventually took him down in a sting operation. He's now on a plane flying back to Russia. But all smiles. A lot of people are very happy that Brittney Griner, her nightmare is over.
Pierre Thomas, Viktor Bout, no real intelligence value now. I mean, all of his activities were so long ago.
Absolutely. His intelligence opportunities to wreak havoc are over. The U.S. law enforcement had tried to get information from him, obviously, but now he's of limited value in terms of intelligence. Some law enforcement officials, of course, wanted him to serve his sentence to pay a penalty for all that death that he helped bring about across the world. But again, everyone today happy that Brittney Griner is coming home.
Okay, Pierre, thanks. I want to bring in our military analyst, Steve Gannon. Of course, Steve, this comes as we're seeing Vladimir Putin's forces face trouble in Ukraine. That's the backdrop for this entire negotiation.
Yeah, George, it all comes back down to Ukraine and for Putin trying to gain negotiating leverage and to get the U.S. to come off of its very hard line on Ukraine. I do want to go back just briefly to something that President Biden said that's very important here. And he made the comment here that people need to be careful about where and when they travel. Look at the State Department advisories. What he's saying is that the Russians will always hold some Americans on trumped up charges. And so they may have let Brittney Griner go here today, but they will grab somebody somewhere else and have them as a negotiating tool sometime in the future. So this is what the president's saying. Be careful. Don't be that next pawn that gets grabbed.
Steve, that was a pretty remarkable warning to have that come, not some State Department bulletin, but from the President of the United States.
Yeah, we just need to stand by. This has been the Russian MO for years. It's pretty much KGB standard operating procedure, and so we can expect that the Russians will want to have at least a few Americans that they can use to negotiate when it's useful. Obviously, Brittney Griner's utility has peaked, and so Putin has let her go. But we see that Paul Whelan still is held because Putin believes that there's still some negotiating leverage to be had with him.
And Steve, does this swap at this time tell you that more is going on in possible negotiations over the war in Ukraine?
At this point, George, I think it's just scene setting and Putin trying to improve his negotiating position. This, as Martha said, this is not going to change a lot of minds, but it has been an irritant, and it's been something that the president hasn't been able to further any broader discussions with NATO allies and with the Ukrainians about potential peace negotiations, because it's just that political problem for President Biden, and now Putin has solved that, and Putin will hope that will begin to move things forward towards a negotiated settlement.
Okay, Steve Gaynor, thanks very much. I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, John Carl. John, we saw the smile on Cherelle Griner's face. We saw President Biden take to the cameras early this morning. He's on a pretty remarkable run over the last several weeks.
He sure is, George, but this one particularly sweet for President Biden. This had been such a high priority for him. And think about this. Brittney Griner has been in Russian prisons for 294 days. Almost immediately since she was detained. This was a priority, not just for the Biden administration, but personally for President Biden. And when you think about her detention coming exactly 1 week before the Russians invaded Ukraine, the negotiations against a backdrop that couldn't have been any more difficult. Biden, at the very time his administration trying to negotiate her release, also leading worldwide opposition to the Russian invasion. A tricky situation, to say the least, and one where the Russians, as Steve mentioned, were clearly trying to use her not just as a bargaining chip to get somebody else released, Viktor Bout, but clearly trying to use this to gain leverage against that U.S. opposition and the U.S. worldwide opposition to the invasion of Ukraine.
John Carl, not many issues draw bipartisan support in Washington these days, expected here.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something, and not just bipartisan, George. I mean, there was a nationwide movement to bring attention, to keep attention on this case for nearly 10 months. Sustained attention, Democrat, Republican, but also out in the sports world, the NBA, the WNBA, trying to make sure that Brittney Griner was not forgotten as she spent all that time in a Russian prison.
And Martha, these negotiations always so fraught for presidents. The more you trade, the more it could encourage adversaries to take more hostages.
Exactly, and that's what administrations trouble over every time. And in the end, if you can free someone and you give up someone who is of no value essentially anymore, that cycle could continue. And I think that is exactly why President Biden said, please be careful. Please do not go to places you are not supposed to be. Take heed of those State Department statements and warnings when you travel, because indeed the Russians will take someone else if someone is there, and they will negotiate. And in this one, they got Viktor Bout. There's so many exchanges over the past many years, and of course, Trevor Reed was freed in an exchange as well. But now we have Brittney Griner, and we're all very happy about that.
That is the good news today. Brittney Griner is free from Russian prison on a plane now on her way home. That's all for us right now. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.